Could Donald Trump be planning to find a way around presidential term restrictions? In an interview with NBC News while travelling on Air Force One, Trump was asked whether he would consider seeking a third term in the White House.
You said you were not joking about a third term, about possibly wanting a third term. Does that mean you're not planning to leave office on January 20th?
I'm not looking at that, but I'll tell you, I have had more people ask me to have a third term, which is in a way a fourth term because the other election, the 2020 election was totally rigged. So it's sort of a fourth term in a certain way. I just don't want the credit for the second because Biden was so bad. He did such a bad job. I'm just telling you, I have had more people say, please run again. I said, we have a long way to go before we even think about that.
In the past, when Donald Trump has said similar things, allies of the president have said that he's just trolling his opponents, trying to wind up the libs. When pressed on this by NBC, Trump said this. "I'm not joking," Trump said when asked to clarify, "but I'm not. It is far too early to think about it." When asked whether he has been presented with plans to allow him to seek a third term, Trump said, "There are methods which you could do it." The 22nd Amendment of the American Constitution states that a president cannot be elected to more than 2 terms. It was ratified in 1951 after FDR was elected for a 4th term. Cardi B's favourite president, by the way. To change or abolish the rule, it would take either 2/3 of Congress or 2/3 of the states to agree to hold a constitutional convention. Then, it would have to be ratified by at least 3/4 of the states. But there is a potential workaround. If Donald Trump decided to be someone's vice presidential pick in 2028, say on the ticket with J.D. Vance, he could become president again if his running mate stepped aside after winning the election. Donald Trump said that this was one method that he had in mind, but, quote, "there are others too." This is from NBC News again. Asked to share another method, Trump simply responded, "No." It's one of the reasons why I do, despite myself, I find him quite funny. This is not the first time that Trump has raised the possibility of seeking a third presidential term. This is from an event he did in January at the Congressional Institute.
I've raised a lot of money for the next race that I assume I can't use for myself, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't know. I think I'm not allowed to run again. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to run again?
Helena, last time, Trump was a little bit coy when he was talking about a third term. Do you think that he's becoming more confident about it? What's changed?
And I think broadly when it comes to Trump, I think a lot of people have said this, and people can take what he says with a pinch of salt, but I think that it stands more to his confidence in terms of his power to do what he wants now that he's in office, rather than necessarily his specific desire to manipulate the system to allow him to run again in 2028. I mean, of course, he wants to be quite very old when it comes to 2028, or of course 2032, if he does reach the end of a third term, even if he did get to one. So I think that even the Republicans would be a little bit shy on trying to let him do that anyway, or trying to manipulate a ticket with him, say, as the vice president to J.D. Vance, who then stepped aside. I think these things it's pretty far out to be thinking about what his own personal plans are. And he says lots of things without realize what he's saying. We've seen him flip from one thing to the other, calling Zelensky a dictator one week, only to now say he's very angry with Vladimir Putin over how they're negotiating a potential ceasefire in Ukraine. So he's somebody who says lots of things without thinking, says lots of bullshit comments without really understanding the veracity of what he's saying or the impact of whether these things are going to be meaningful in the public discourse. He usually just says any old shit half the time. So do I really think that this is him somehow staking his claim to wanting to run again? He also I don't think it is. He also knows what his voters want to hear. His voters want the Trump dynasty. The MAGA cultists, they are desperate for the Donalds to continue to reign over them. I mean, he described himself as a king. And what I personally believe is a message to those people, the people in America who, despite fighting so hard for a republic, desperately want there to be a monarchy instead of a president. So I think it's more a sign of the power of the Republican Party in office and his strength given the executive power that he's been allowed to wield since he's been in government. There's been very little pushback at all from both Democrats and from the judiciary over him doing essentially what he wants to do with executive power that he shouldn't have, overriding Congress in plenty of situations, overriding diplomatic and democratic norms every single way you possibly could. Judges go, you can't do this deportation. He goes, well, just try and stop me, or just ignore them. And when he's acting with this level of impunity, with no kind of system to hold him back from doing so, given that it looks like the current institutions in America are so weak and so their claws are so blunt that they can't actually stop him from doing everything that he wants to do. Why would he not feel emboldened? So even if he has no intention of running for a third term, to just talk about violating an amendment of the Constitution, something that he's obviously previously said that he has wanted to undermine the Constitution as well in plenty of other situations, which hasn't stopped his supporters from liking him, even though they market themselves as constitutionalists. The judges he appointed to the Supreme Court market themselves as constitutionalists, right? This is something that he is not concerned with. And again, it's far too early for me to be speculating over his personal desires. But does it show you at the level of strength that he feels that he can do what he wants with impunity? Absolutely.
I mean, look, I know I talk about the Roman Empire too much. I think about the Roman Empire every day, but even under Emperor Augustus, he maintained the fiction that the Senate was still in charge. He was merely the first citizen. It wasn't until Domitian came along that whole pretense was done away with. At the risk of sounding like a sixth form politics teacher, I'm just curious, what do you think about the idea of limits on how many times someone can be elected president or a head of government? Because it's not uncommon in the UK for us to have, maybe 3 back-to-back election wins. Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, definitely. How many times was Wilson? I don't know. Hopefully someone in the comments can tell me. What do you think about it in principle?
Actually, I'm pretty much in favour of term limits. I think when it comes to someone with presidential power, it's very specific. So, of course, any prime minister is entirely curtailed by the fact that they are just essentially the person who has the most amount of direction in terms of where an elected parliamentary government is allowed to use their power. Someone who has a huge amount of presidential power, who is in control of things like the military. You look at, for example, like the French system, where Macron doesn't really have power over the influence of fiscal policy unless he rams it through the amendment, the constitutional power that he has. But what the military is solely in command of Macron. And if you have somebody who has that level of power, who can wield that in the worst possible way, then allowing them to stay in power due to having a dedicated follower base who understand that they can use that executive power with impunity, that you're more likely to see, I guess, I was going to say more likely to see kind of a cult of personality around them. We see that with Trump regardless of whether there's term limits or not. But I guess that the only thing I would put under that is that Trump knows that he can do whatever he wants because he doesn't have to bother seeking re-election unless he tries to run again, That's the one thing that people put to me as the big warning for people who wanted to sit the election out in America, which is that, well, of course, Project 2025 was going to happen in Trump's second term, because in the first term, he wants to be able to get re-elected, which means he can't just do whatever he wants. He's got to maintain at least the balance of interests for sectors of the population that would then re-elect him. If you have a term limit on somebody, then they are incentivized, I guess, to wield their power as much as they want in their second term, in the knowledge that at the end of the day, once they're out of office, that it's all water under the bridge at that point, because you're not trying to court anybody's votes. The power is centralized within you to do whatever you want to maintain your legacy, rather than trying to maximize your own personal success in future, because you know that there aren't any other elections that you're trying to win. So I think it has its ups and its downs, but broadly I think that there being the necessity for change and avoiding the kind of level of centralized power in one individual figure for too long, I think broadly that's where I stand with term limits, but I understand why people don't like them as well.
See, I love a good sixth form politics discussion. Not all the time on Novara Live, just occasionally. It's not just Donald Trump who's been thinking about creative ways of getting around election rules. Elon Musk, seen here wearing a hat in the shape of a giant wedge of cheese, appeared at a rally in Wisconsin during what has turned out to be the most expensive judicial election in American history. Cheesehead is apparently a nickname for people from Wisconsin because I guess they make a lot of cheese, but I digress. At present, Wisconsin's state Supreme Court has a liberal majority, but that could all change if Judge Brad Schimmel, endorsed by both Donald Trump and Elon Musk, is able to defeat Judge Susan Crawford at the ballot box this week. Huge sums of money have been poured into the campaigns of both candidates, more than $81 million so far, with Elon Musk stumping up at least $14 million for Judge Schimmel. Judge Crawford's campaign received millions of dollars from George Soros, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman, and a political action committee set up by Mike Bloomberg. But it doesn't end there. Elon Musk has offered $100 to voters signing a petition against so-called activist judges, and at the rally in Wisconsin, handed out even larger sums of money.
Let me first hand out 2 $1 million checks in appreciation. Okay, so the first check goes to Nicholas Jacobs. All right. Now, I should say that the reason, the reason for the checks is that it's really just to get attention. It's like we need to get attention, and it's somewhat inevitably when I do these things, the sort of it causes the legacy media to kind of lose their minds. And then they'll run it on every news channel, and I'm like, I couldn't pay them it would cost like 10 times more, or to get the kind of coverage that we get. So, all right, thank you so much. You're welcome. Thank you. All right. All right. You can just, I guess, take it if you want. We'll get. I think we'll get you a real one too.
I've also been corrected in the comments. Cheesehead, while also being a nickname for people from Wisconsin, is the nickname of fans of the Green Bay Packers, which is the biggest football team in the state. Not real football, obviously. Stupid American football. Anyway, that was Elon Musk handing out 2 checks for $1 million and boasting about how it's a cheaper way of getting attention than paying for political advertising. Now, in case you're wondering, it is actually illegal to try and buy people's votes, but 2 lower courts in Wisconsin sided with Musk's lawyers, who argued that they weren't bribes and described them instead like this. They are intended to generate a grassroots movement in opposition to activist judges, not to expressly advocate for or against any candidate. Not everyone is as comfortable with Elon Musk's injection of cash into the Wisconsin judicial race. These were protesters assembled outside of his town hall event in Green Bay. One heckler even made it inside the event.
As you may have seen with stuff that we've posted on the Doge.gov website and the Doge handle on the X platform, there is a tremendous amount of waste and fraud in the federal government. Like, shocking, really. It's insane. Yeah, it's really wild. So, it was inevitable that at least a few Soros operatives would be in the audience. Give my regards to George. Say hi to George for me. USA, 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 USA.
I just find it very funny how cognitive dissonance works. So paying voters $1 million during a judicial election is grassroots activism, but an actual protester must be a George Soros operative. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but it sounds just a little bit like projection to me. Elon Musk says that he's invested in the outcome of this judicial race because he objects to judges being able to thwart the will of the president in implementing new laws and executive orders. But there may be other, less highfalutin motivations at play. In January, Tesla filed a lawsuit against the state of Wisconsin as it refused to give Elon Musk's company bypass rules for local car dealerships. Just a few days later, Musk's political organizations began making donations to Wisconsin Republicans. This isn't the first time Elon Musk has tried this tactic. This is from The Guardian. Musk's Political Action Committee used a nearly identical tactic before the presidential election last year, offering to pay $1 million a day to voters in Wisconsin and 6 other battleground states who signed a petition supporting the First and Second Amendments. A judge in Pennsylvania said that prosecutors failed to show the effort was an illegal lottery and allowed it to continue through Election Day. Helena, let's just be really, really real for 1 minute. Would you sign a petition implying that you'd vote a certain way for £1 million?
I mean, if I could not be held legally culpable for doing so and it was something I was going to do anyway, I'll take £1 million from someone who wants to dole out to me regardless. You know, if it's no skin off my nose, if it's something that I had already the intentions of doing. But on like the serious note, the important thing really here is that, you know, democracy cannot survive the rich. Now, I don't care whether it's Elon Musk, I don't care whether it's George Soros, you know, I don't want rich people influencing elections. I don't want corporations influencing elections. Citizens United is an absolute damning indictment on the state of American democracy, the ways in which corporations are allowed to just buy politicians in America. You've seen people, there's a TikTok account called, I forget what the actual name of it, but he literally starts in, is your member of Congress a piece of shit? Let's find out, and looks through all of their list of donations, all of the PACs that have donated to them, number of stocks that they hold and trades that they've done. And you always see it's the really long-term politicians in America, the ones who've sat in the same seat for decades and decades and decades. They always have the dirtiest campaign finances. They've all got the most corporate PAC money behind them, the large individual donations from people who are unscrupulous. And this is not how democracy should work. The amount of influence that the rich people have on democracy more broadly, this has to be curtailed. And this is why I think this is one of the biggest and strongest arguments that the left has for wealth redistribution. You know, you can always talk about taxes funding government spending, regardless of whether you believe in MMT or not. But people are going to be very, very hard to win over on that metric because they think, well, why does the government need more money? But the framing that you cannot have a system of governance, you cannot have a system electorally that can function in a way that is free and fair, where the rich have huge amounts of control over who gets precedent, who is allowed to be funded in certain ways, the amount of advertising people have access to, and not just in Senate, House, judicial races, comptrollers, the president, but you look at the amount of people in the House, for example, in Democratic primaries, progressive candidates like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, who got ousted because of huge amounts of AIPAC money that was thrown into their elections. It just shows you that money in politics has to be curtailed by law if necessary. Of course, not that the law matters to people like Elon Musk, because they'll break it anyway and accuse anybody who tries to undermine them of being an activist judge. Another phrase I fucking despise. I absolutely hate that phrase, because what it implies is that the law as it's written is perfect. There is no problem with the law. And the only reason why we are seeing opposition to what's happening in the Trump camp, for example, is being done by activists trying to undermine the hidden fifth column, trying to get rid of presidential powers when they're actually just implementing the law as it is and be able to interpret it as it is written to try and curtail the powers, because that's what it should be doing. They get derided. This is exactly what happened in the UK. Remember, we had the Daily Mail, I believe it was the Daily Mail, correct me if I'm wrong, of enemies of the people with 3 judges. Not because they'd done anything they wanted to do. They did their bloody job, which was looking at the law as it was written and then interpreting it with regards to a legal case. You know, if the law is bad, that is not the fault of judges. If you want to change that law, you should go and change it by winning an election. But of course, that's not what these people care about. And of course, you can now buy elections, as we can see for Elon Musk, and also get very little pushback. And when it comes to looking at the kind of Soros-Musk divide, this is why you have this big problem with the liberal ideology that sees money in politics as being a problem only if it's the bad people. You know, you see plenty of people. I remember there was a Liberal Democrat MP on an LBC debate panel talking about how, well, Elon Musk is bad because he uses his money for bad things. But people like Andrew Carnegie and Bill Gates, they were good because they use their money for good things. I'm like, no. Billionaires are a policy failure. Having this much wealth where you can not just distort economics, distort markets, distort the consumption patterns and outbid to the regular working and middle class people for assets, you also distort democracy. You distort the ways in which our politicians act. And this is not a functional way of running a country. This is not responsible statecraft. And it doesn't matter. You may agree with everything that George Soros believes in on like social policy, even though that essentially most of what he believes and supports is a way of trying to get people to avoid the fact that he got rich off the systems of exploitation that lead to the levels of societal problems that he wants to stop through his money. It should not be up to him to decide where that money gets dispersed to how to solve those problems by electing politicians that he wants. No. That money should already be in the public realm. That funding, those resources should already be distributed amongst the people who create that wealth, which is, of course, the working class. And they should be the ones who decide through democratic elections that have finance caps and are done fairly and freely and are not under that influence, right? What is to say that everything that George Soros believes on like social policy is correct? Obviously, me disagree on economics. I'm a communist. Of course, I hate what he believes in economics, right? But even if, say, he supports things that are, broadly kind of about social progressivism, who's to say that he's correct about that and that he should have undue influence to be able to put that into politics? There's no way. You can't say that he can, and he shouldn't be able to, just as Elon Musk shouldn't be able to either. And by liberal types refusing to critique Soros' influence, refusing to be able to combat people like Michael Bloomberg being able to buy huge amounts of electoral advantage through PACs and things like that as well, it undermines the broad opposition to the Republican Party and to Republican politics more broadly, which it is they only exist to serve the rich. Right? While the Democrats also exist to serve the rich, at least they have some level of counterweight to that, and that they're funded by trade unions as well in some parts, But it's impossible to be able to put that across to the regular average voter. And same is true with Labour and the Conservatives in the UK, and of course Reform UK as well. Because as soon as there is one party on one side that is claiming to be progressive in a broad sense, but it's taking money from, I don't know, a hedge fund that's based in the Cayman Islands, which is one of the biggest donations they've ever had, that they did a specific time to avoid it being scrutinized before the election, then it just shows that no one can be trusted. And when no one can be trusted because they're all bought out by rich interests, that's when people slide towards the distaste of politics more broadly, which leads to the kind of outcomes that we're seeing where anti-establishment populist right-wing parties are gaining more traction. And that is dangerous for the future of democracy in general. So the main point is we have to get money out of politics, and this should be legislated. We need finance caps, and we need to end Citizens United once and for all.
So Citizens United, they're not a League Two football club. It's a reference to a Supreme Court ruling from 2010, I believe, which basically ruled that corporations could make huge campaign finance donations to the tune of millions and millions of dollars because they've got First Amendment rights. So it's a completely crazy ruling which says a corporation is the same as a person. And so corporations can have political rights the way people have political rights. Completely batshit ruling. If you want to make yourself angry, definitely look it up.